a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Seem to be getting over kind of a little bit of a cold or something, so if I start coughing my head off, I will try my best not to cough into the mic. I was going to do the show on the Miami Aerospace Academy, but there just wasn't enough information out there to do an entire hour show, so I kind of changed the subject matter to the big panic of the 1980s. If you lived through it, you should know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, well, listen up and I'll tell you all about it. I have talked to people that say they don't drink coffee. To me, this is like saying they don't breathe. A coffee isn't just hot fruit juice. It's one of the most essential oils out there. It makes the insides of your body function. It is God's greatest gift to man. After that whole forbidden fruit fiasco, God thought man needed something to get his head out of his backside. All that moping around in the desert and not really getting a whole lot done. He sent down an angel. I think his name was Cappuccino, to scatter some coffee seeds around where folks would find them. Then somebody had to have a vision about harvesting, floating, roasting, and grinding. Well, that must have been one really weird dream. The next thing we know, the Industrial Revolution gets kicked off, and, well, maybe the world didn't improve much, but boy, did things get done. Today, the best coffee in the universe can be found at 4501 McPherson, the Organic Man Coffee Trike. Julio spends his days and some of his nights finding new and wonderful things to do with roasted coffee. If you just can't get there from there, go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop and get a bag or two of God's ultimate gift to man. How many of y'all remember the Satanic Panic that swept the country back in the 1980s? It went from mysterious hooded figures doing rituals in remote locations, like the encounter I had, to just about every daycare, nursing home, you name it, they were all involved in performing human sacrifices. The press was having a field day, printing up all manner of bizarre stories involving the Dark One. The government was quick to rush out a bunch of experts who all said there was nothing to see here. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Just like that, anyone trying to say there was illicit activity going on somewhere was suddenly laughed at. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Ask the boys in the white lab coats, and unfortunately a few clergy, and they'll tell you there is no devil. The modern world is simply too well educated to lay heed to old superstitions. Back in the early 1980s, I was still working as a firefighter. Our station would also work as a dispatch for the ambulance. Oh, this was long before 911, and sometimes we would get phone calls from places that we couldn't respond to, like the north side of the state. 1984, we began getting ambulance calls for folks who had taken their own lives, suicides. Now, granted, people have been offing themselves since as far back as recorded time, and maybe even longer. This was different. All the calls were for high school kids. It all started on a calm, normal day. The phone rang, and it was somebody needing an ambulance yesterday. A family had found their son hanging in the garage. He was beyond help, but we dispatched the medics anyway. They did what they could and then called for the medical examiner. The crew were upset. Having a young life snuffed out like this has an effect on just about everyone. To alleviate the psychological impact, we tended to use what is known as gallows humor. Make jokes about really unfunny things. Those who never rode an ambulance or worked in the emergency department will think this is inhuman. I've seen a lot of really good medics turn in their gear and go away to do something else because the stress was just too much. So we made weird little jokes about the dead to make our minds ignore the tragedy. I'm sure Vic Hermanson can understand. He probably had some really good jokes back in the day. Well, the next day, there was another call. A young girl had taken an overdose. The family was beyond consoling. She had been a promising young student, and they could think of no reason for her actions. The third day, a third call, followed by number 4, and then 5, and 6. It was happening every day. Those of us answering the phone began to hesitate lifting the handset. You could see the hand shaking as the firefighter tried to do his job. When you did get the handset up to your mouth, you almost couldn't say, "Fire department, what is your emergency?" Every day there was a young kid who would never see tomorrow. Questions were being asked that could never be answered. The folks who pretended to have all the answers couldn't even figure out what the questions were. They did say that these deaths were all unrelated. No way did any of these young folks know each other than maybe the fact that they all lived within about a 5-mile radius. Weeks into this ordeal, the phone rang and I was right next to it. And yes, my hand shook as I lifted the handset. Yes, there was a young boy who had tried to kill himself. However, the ambulance arrived and they managed to keep him breathing. They got him to the ED, and surprisingly enough, this time we won. It kind of felt like we had won the battle. The folks actually relaxed a bit. There was a collective sigh of relief. Well, the next day, just to be funny, I said, "Gee, I'll just bet we'll have 2 suicides today." Everybody laughed. Nobody was laughing that evening. 2 high school students had killed themselves. The following day, there was another, and another. Finally, one day, we went the whole day without having to fill out that form, the one with cause of death on it. The phone would ring, but it was fun stuff like house fires and car accidents. No more dead kids. The boy who lived was questioned, and the answers were not what the experts wanted to hear. He said he knew all the other kids involved. They had all made a pact with the devil to gain some much sought after thing. Something I can't remember what it was, or perhaps they just never said. This would be in exchange for their lives. He said the day that he did not succeed, the rest realized there had been a price that needed to be paid, and so the next day, two kids had to off themselves. The experts declared the boy didn't know what he was talking about. He was lying, or he was confused. Something along those lines. There was no such thing as a pact with the devil, suicide cult. No way. These are modern times, and people didn't do things like that. I had to do a lot of research in order to find all the dates and the numbers and a lot of the parts of this story that I just don't remember anymore, even though I was kind of involved in it. My memory is a bit foggy since this was all about 40 odd years ago. In one article, it said there were 20 students who all died. Another said there was only 14. They were discounting a few because they didn't exactly fit into the box like the others. The official story is still these deaths were unrelated. Just kids being kids. They say it had nothing to do with Satanic Panic of the 80s. I must have read dozens of websites, all with different ideas on what happened that year. The press was quick to jump on the suggestion that weird things were going on all over the country. The person reporting the crimes didn't even need any proof, just a really compelling story. For a few years there, it got exciting as all those overly publicized stories were repeated. Detailed accounts, some with way too many details, were being aired on the news as everybody tried to get in on the hype. I seem to have lost a paragraph there somewhere. This was before and after the incident that took place there in the Clear Lake area. As training for being a new law enforcement officer, Nick Whitney, he was our firearms instructor, had convinced a bunch of us that we needed to attend the street survival classes that were being held in San Antonio. Sector refused to pay for it, saying we didn't need any more training than what they were providing. And they wouldn't give us the time off to attend either. We had to use our annual leave and we had to pay our own way to get to the class. It was well worth it. While there, I picked up a bunch of books the average police officer or patrol agent would probably ignore. One was called The Satan Hunter by Thomas Wedge. In the book, he says, "It does not matter what we believe. It's what they believe that makes them dangerous." The guy in the Matamoros Death Ranch ran a checkpoint because he believed he was invisible. There are magic amulets that make you bulletproof, or at least you believe you are. Think about that for a second. Some smuggler pulls a knife and he starts walking towards you. You pull your sidearm and you order him to stop and drop the knife. If he believes he's bulletproof, he's going to keep coming. You're going to have to do the right thing and then live with it. You're going to have to put up with the press yelling and screaming you didn't have to shoot that guy just 'cause he was trying to stab you with a knife. You should have shot him in the leg, that kind of thing. The the experts. Wild theories about ritual sexual abuse, widespread occultism, and devil worship dominated news headlines and created a moral panic that led to unfounded accusations and many wrongful imprisonments. In the 1960s and 70s, space was the place to be, and a lot of kids wanted to be the next Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin. Nobody wanted to be the next Gus Grissom. I wonder why. Something to do with Apollo 1, maybe? Folks knew if their kids were going to become astronauts, they needed the right kind of education. The best way to get as good an education as possible was a live in academy. That way, the students were learning all day, every day, and the parents didn't have to put up with them. I tried to find the background of this school, let y'all know when it was founded and all that, but all the folks talked about was what took place in 1979. The academy was paramilitary. They wore uniforms to class, they marched around, they had strict rules and regulations, and they enforced them with corporal punishment. If you were caught violating the rules, you were told, bend over and grab your ankles. The butt was about to get beat. They used a cricket bat, and the guy knew how to use it. I guess the idea was if it worked for the big military schools, it should work for Miami Aerospace. I also tried looking into the Academy's president, Evaristo Marina, but all I could find was snippets of information. He was born in Cuba and he naturalized to the United States. The conspiracy side of my brain, that would be the right side, and parts of the left side, and maybe 90% of the gray matter. The parts of my brain that keep me from believing anything said on the lamestream media. That part of the brain. Anyway, any newspaper or magazine, most politicians, my brain got me to wondering why the history of the Academy, as well as their president, was so hard to track down. Maybe if I flew to Miami, I'd be able to find something, but this is a 1 hour show. When I hear hoofbeats, I think zebra. Did somebody want to keep as much about the Academy away from the light of day? And if so, why? Perhaps because of what happened. It doesn't really matter that much. The Academy was there, and Marina was in charge. October 25th, 1979, students at the Miami Military Academy experienced a frightening outbreak of sudden mass hysteria that began in the science class and spread throughout the entire school. The experts of the day tried to explain things away without using words like demons or devil worship or anything that sounded scary. The story people were trying to explain away was just about the entire school, beginning at the science department, went nuts and tried to destroy the building. Kids were screaming and behaving as if they were possessed by, well, demons. The day of madness began as the 10th graders at the academy had been having an unusual lesson on hypnotism and the supernatural. Space studies and the supernatural. Keep that in mind, it will come up later. During the lesson, a few kids began to act up, followed by screaming and running from the room. This activity soon spread from one end of the building to the other. making 300 students suddenly become crazed. The entire school was one big meltdown. Kids were screaming about seeing Bloody Mary. There were demons in the hallways. The devil was in one or several classrooms. One girl ran into the bathroom where she began to levitate as she was screaming, "The devil is inside me." The police department and fire department arrived at the scene, and they did what they could to corral the rioting students and bring order to chaos. One student was seen crashing through a second-story window head first, falling to the ground. He jumped back to his feet and then tried to fight with the officers who had run to help him. They said he displayed superhuman strength. There wasn't a scratch on him once they managed to get him calmed down, and there were no drugs or alcohol in his system. As questions were asked and eventually answered, some students told of having used a Ouija board to summon a demon that was causing most of the problems. This was a class activity. It was October and Halloween was coming up, but using a talking board in school, that just sounds like really bad idea. Evaristo Marina, the students all referred to him as El General, or the General, was not to be found that day. Nobody knew where he was or when he might be back. When he did finally return, Marina told everyone that the students had been put up with this outburst in order to damage his bid, that would be Marina's bid, for city council. They were all being paid to destroy the school. The damage to the building was far beyond what could be expected from a bunch of kids running wild. Doors had been ripped off of their hinges. You know, those great big industrial doors that they put in schools. There were holes knocked through walls as if somebody had driven a car through the building. This wasn't the first or the last time the Aerospace Academy received negative publicity. In 1985, the school was under fire for much more serious reason. It turned out the school was unaccredited, unlicensed, and pretty much unregulated. The place was privately funded, but parents and some unmentioned donors were the ones paying for everything. 4 cadets got arrested on charges of sexually assaulting younger boys. A 17-year-old girl said she had been impregnated by another cadet who had forced his way into her dormitory in the middle of the night. Some students as young as 6 were telling of having to endure some very nasty things. None of the school's teachers or employees were implicated in any of the sexual abuse, which owner Evaristo Marina maintained were all untrue. Many folks say Marina was a fraud and a power-hungry disciplinarian, acting more like a demon than a school president. What does Satanism and outer space have to do with each other? I have no idea yet. Jack Parsons was big into the occult, and he performed satanic rituals before each and every rocket test. Jack Parsons, the founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, a branch of NASA, was really into devil worship. At age 12, he tried to summon a demon in his bedroom. People say there's no way he could have done such a thing, and yet Jack said that it worked, and it scared the life out of him. He said he was never going to try necromancy again, but he did. In the 1940s, the military was so intent on having rocket assist takeoff for their planes that they were willing to dance with the devil if need be. Remember, if you dance with the devil, he gets to lead. Before any tests of the JATO rockets, that's a jet assisted takeoff. It's a type of assisted takeoff for helping overloaded aircraft into the air by providing additional thrust in the form of small rockets. Rockets, not jets. Rockets. A jet propulsion laboratory worked on rockets, not jets. It's one of those things, it's all in the name. Too many folks associated rockets with Buck Rogers and sci fi movies. The folks in college, trying to act like they were all high and mighty, used the word jet instead of rocket so they wouldn't be associated with those movies. Oh, where was I? Oh, yes. Before any test of a JATO rocket, Jack would perform a satanic ritual to draw the powers of the Dark Lord to help get his work accomplished. The military brass would all turn a blind eye to what he was doing. As for JPL, it officially opened its doors October 31st, 1936. Certain dates hold a lot of power to certain people. For example, September 11th, 1683, was the last day of the siege of Vienna. The next morning, the Holy Roman Empire and the Polish army arrived and they kicked butt. This may be why September 11th was chosen as the day to attack the Twin Towers. Certain dates hold significance to certain people. Jack managed to blow himself up. Well, that's the official story. Some say that he was helped along, maybe by government operatives or perhaps somebody with a grudge. Jack was a very successful rocket scientist. Would somebody get the wrong idea in order to be a good rocket scientist that in order to get things into outer space, you needed a little black magic in your pocket? Joanne Didion remarked in the 1960s ended when Charles Manson's followers murdered Sharon Tate and four others August 1969. One of the killers, Tex Watson, said, "I am the devil, and I've come to do the devil's work." The world did change around this time. Back in the 1930s and 40s, women stayed home and did what they needed to do to raise the family and run the house while the men went off to work. World War II kind of screwed everything up. Well, suddenly women had an urge to get jobs and make money instead of being housewives. Being a stay at home mother is a very real, very hard job. Society began to make it more of an insult. Movies showed housewives as being somehow less intelligent, less sophisticated than women who went out and worked, earning a paycheck and paying income tax. It was pretty much how things were when I was young. Fathers went to work and mothers raised the kids. The government had to get by on only one taxable income per household. Just think how much more cash could be siphoned away from the family if both parents worked and paid taxes. Does this sound a bit like a conspiracy to y'all? Well, I believe it is. And my cat will not leave the microphone away alone. Oh well, you stop it. Getting back to the subject at hand, mothers no longer wanted to be mothers. The title housewife was turned into an insult. As more women moved into the workforce, somebody had to be put in charge of raising the kids. Well, along comes these government agencies. Yeah, nobody should allow the government to raise their kids, but, well, let's let the government raise the kids. Put the little buggers in daycare or after school activities, which are mostly being run by government officials. You can see them when you get home. Quality time over quantity. What I find difficult to understand was that some families were spending so much taking care of the kids, the extra income is all being spent on daycare and the second car that the wife needs to get to work and things like that, to a point where that second income is almost null and void. It's all going to income tax. The bills were increasing faster than the income. As parents' responsibilities to raise their kids was being moved to others, the kids began to have less supervision and more time to look into getting in trouble. As the Satanic Panic was getting going, folks began to see and hear him everywhere. McDonald's publicly announced that its semi founder, Ray Kroc, did not financially support the Church of Satan. McDonald's always seems to forget about their real founders, the McDonald's brothers, but that's another story. Procter and Gamble became the target of rumors that its 13-starred logo, a reference to the 13 original colonies, was the symbol of the devil. A lot of really cool horror films came out showing the interactions between humans and the devil. The Exorcist, 1973, The Omen, 1976, the Amityville Horror, all dealt with demonic themes. Snowball, you're being a pain. I don't know what's gotten into her. Uh-oh. Nah, that can't be it. The book Michelle Remembers was released in 1980, the day after Halloween. It was listed as nonfiction account written by a therapist, Lawrence Pasder, and his patient, Michelle Smith. Being nonfiction, the book read more like a fictional horror story. Smith had had a miscarriage and she was devastated over it. To relieve her distress, she went to a therapist, Pasder. In order to get to the real cause of her problems, Pasder used regression therapy. He put her into a deep hypnotic state and then just kind of led her through her memories until they became a total horror story. I know a lot of hypnotherapists, and they all have rules about how leading the patient is wrong. There is a right way and a wrong way to recover memories. It would appear that Pasder was using the wrong way. The book flew off the shelves, and Pasder and Smith started appearing on television. As shocked audiences tuned in, Smith recounted the horrific things that had happened to her in her childhood. Smith said that her mother had given her away to a satanic cult where she was held captive, tortured, and abused. Smith said she had seen satanic orgies in which one of the members got murdered. She had been buried alive one time. She said that she had seen the devil appear after a Satanist had performed a ritualistic ceremony. Almost from the minute Michelle Remembers publication, its claims and allegations were repeatedly and thoroughly debunked. However, thanks to the widespread and credulous media attention, Pazder and Smith were able to double down on the story. Pazder became seen as an expert in the area of what could come to be called satanic ritual abuse, or SRA. The earliest of the wave of SRA cases began in Kern County, California in 1980. A Bakersfield social worker, after reading Michelle Remembers, learned of a local clandestine occult sex ring from two children who had been coerced into fabricating the claims by a relative. From 1984 to 1986, the investigation into these claims sent at least 26 people to jail in interrelated convictions, despite a complete lack of corroborating physical evidence for any of the claims. Nearly all of these convictions have since been overturned, including the man who served 20 years of a 40-year sentence and two parents who were sentenced to 240 years in prison after their two sons, who had been coached, accused them of abuse. In the summer of 1983, a woman named Judy Johnson told the police that her 2-year-old son had been diddled at his daycare. McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. She believed the teacher, Ray Buckey, was responsible. 1990, Johnson went further, recounting an incident that included a goat man, a ritual-type atmosphere, and a church where another staff member had misbehaved towards the children in their care. She said her son had been levitated from the floor and he flew around the room. The press ran with the story. This was a cash cow for the newspapers. Accusations were repeated on the nightly news over and over. Later, it came out that the mother was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Well, that's what the authorities tell us, anyway. During the investigations, the police sent letters to 200 parents of both current and former children seeking information about the school. The letter read, "Please question your children to see if he or she has been a witness to any crime or if he or she has been a victim. Our investigation indicates that possible criminal actions, including sex, fondling, inappropriate touching, and other nastiness, have possibly been committed under the pretense of taking a child's temperature." The letter, which may have influenced the investigation from the onset, triggered widespread panic among the parents. They found they were ill-equipped to question the children, and the professional investigators weren't any better at it. The authorities asked the children leading questions like, "Can you remember looking at pictures of naked people?" The investigators told the children, "Your classmates have already shared some really yucky secrets. Do you have any yucky secrets that you want to share?" One child was called a scaredy cat for denying that anything had happened. Well, children like to do what adults want them to do. So they began to describe things that happened. The teachers beat a horse to death with a baseball bat. They squeezed a parakeet to death. They sacrificed a baby in the church. And then they made all the children drink the blood. There were secret tunnels underneath the school, and they played a game called Lookout, where the children would stand guard while the teachers did nasty things to their classmates. In the end, after years of trials, all charges against Ray Bucky and the other teachers were dismissed. McMartin was just one preschool where educators were accused of grievous acts against their students. Others also became casualties of the Satanic Panic, which spread fear about terrible things happening in innocent places. As the hype went on, getting piled higher and higher, even the song industry was pulled into it, either through misunderstandings or unsavory business practices. Many musical groups found themselves being scrutinized by the law. Was putting Anton LaVey's picture on the cover of the Hotel California album as somebody in marketing being cool? Or was there a record industry brazen showing of the occult activities? From the late 1960s to the mid 70s, occult and witchcraft records became a phenomena in the US and the UK. These were spoken word LPs that included narrations of rituals and spells by witches and covens, accompanied by some rather bizarre early electronic music. Records such as The Art of Witchcraft by Bobette the Sexy Witch and Ian Richardson and Barbara Haldridge, Maleficarium. Yeah, that's the Hammer of the Witch. Was it the Hammer of the Witch or the Hammer of the Devil? Yeah, the Malus Maleficarium. That was the book used during the witch trials throughout Europe. Anyway, this came out in 1974. You might think these went out under obscure record labels, but the big names were all involved. Capitol Records, A&M, Warner Brothers. These all had occult records. As the idea of Satanism became popular, it meant if you wanted to catch the tidal wave of publicity, you had to uncover some hidden agenda somewhere. People began looking into and discovering satanic and hidden messages were just about everywhere, especially on songs by groups that they didn't like. All that backward masking and words that made no sense. People began to blame record companies and especially the musicians for just about every crime that was committed. In 1985, two young men, Raymond Belknap and James Vance, decided on a suicide pact that left Belknap dead and Vance with some serious injuries. Vance's parents sued the band Judas Priest because their song contained hidden messages like "Do It" and "Let's Be Dead." The band was found not liable. Games like Dungeons and Dragons, which contained magic spells and monsters, and they faced accusations of Satanism as well. A grieving mother whose son had died by suicide formed the organization called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, or BAD, in 1983. She claimed the game encouraged devil worship and was replete with demonology, satanic type rituals, and more. 1972, the publication of The Satan's Cellar, written by Christian evangelist Mike Warnke, recounted his childhood and young adulthood, which he said he had spent in intense satanic worship. Warnke wrote he served as a satanic high priest and was engaged in ritualistic sex orgies. The whole thing turned out to be a fabricated memories, ultimately discredited. The publication of Anton LaVey's Satanic Rituals, also 1972, reinforced the idea that dark occult rituals had become a routine part of life in many of Americans' households. In the 70s, saw the rise of other self proclaimed former Satanists who had become evangelists instead. John Todd, Herschel Smith, David Hansen. All four of these men grew up in Southern California. All of them claim to have conversion experiences that led to them becoming icons in certain religious groups. All of them were linked to the emerging fundamentalist Christian organizations. Todd was supported by Christian tract maker Jack Chick, who used his fabricated claims as a basis for numerous comic style pamphlets protesting against Satanism. Warnke spent over a decade posing as an expert in Satanism for the fundamentalist evangelical Christian community, passing off much of his made up childhood as a template for how real Satanism worked. Excuse me, man. The growing fascination with the occult also coincided with a number of extremely well publicized serial killer cases that took place in the 70s. The Zodiac Killer, the Alphabet Killer, both of whom used ritualistic patterns in their killings, neither of whom were ever caught. Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, the Hillside Stranglers, David Berkowitz. They all sparked a mass panic during the summer of 1977 in New York. Who? Not they. Son of Sam was in New York. The Hillside Stranglers were at California. I forget where John Wayne Gacy was, but yeah, these were the serial killers I grew up hearing about. Many of these well publicized serial killers maintained an image of having the upper hand over the authorities. The Zodiac Killer and Berkowitz wrote taunting letters to the press and the police. Bundy escaped from prison and immediately began killing people again. Gacy had his evil under the most banal of disguises, a friendly clown who performed for children. As the brazen anarchy associated with these kinds of high profile killings grew, so did public fear. Through it all, Christian fundamentalism and the literal belief in angels and devils being on the rise, fundamental preachers like Jerry Falwell and his Moral Majority, which was founded in 1979, gained prominence across the country, passing along a literal fire and brimstone style of Christianity. Any of y'all remember the preacher from Cold Comfort Farm? That kind of thing. Anti-occult crusaders like Pat Pulling, who believed that her son's death by suicide was a result of the Dungeons and Dragons curse, crusaded against role-playing games as dangerous and demonic, was backed by occult fear-mongering from Chick and his Chick Tracts. The media played a huge role in stoking the public fear and fueling misconceptions surrounding occult practices. 1988. Geraldo Rivera. He had a lurid documentary called Devil Worship Exposing Satan's Underground. became the highest rated television documentary to air up to that point. 1991, the 2020 episode aired an official Roman Catholic exorcism. Live on TV, The Exorcism. The things, not even going to say what might have, the demon pops out of the victim and right through the TV screen, but hey, it could happen. Anyway, they had some really bizarre TV shows like Hell's Bells, which attempted to tie rock and roll music to the occult. It was an exciting time to be live. The disastrous McMartin trial remains the largest, longest, and most expensive trial in California history. In 1983, one parent accused one of the staff members at the McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach, California, of abuse. During the investigation, police allowed an unlicensed psychotherapist named T. McFarland to conduct examinations of 400 children who had attended the daycare. McFarland used his anatomically correct doll in a coercive interview process, resulting in a 321 counts of child abuse being leveled against 7 daycare staffers by 41 children. The eyebrow-raising claims included allegations that daycare owners had built secret underground tunnels that were never found, that led to ritual ceremonies, had sacrificed a baby, flushed children down toilets. I can't even get toilet paper to get down the toilet, let alone the baby. And they could turn into witches and fly. After 6 years of investigation and litigation of a 5-year trial, the case ultimately evaporated due to a total lack of evidence. One by one, all charges against the daycare staff were dropped. McMartin Preschool building had been razed in the 90s. In other words, the community got together and destroyed it out of fear. By the mid-80s, the wave of seminaries, tutorials, and educational videos for authorities and evangelicals on the subject of recognizing and fighting satanic cults was sweeping U.S. law enforcement. In El Paso, they were sent to ritual crime seminars. These were classes aimed at law enforcement authorities and taught mostly by other cops, therapists, preachers, and a few born-again Christian claiming to be former high priests or escapees from unspeakable satanic ritual torture cults. God, some of these things are hard to say, just too many wild words in them. The folks putting out most of these training sessions hadn't a clue on what they were saying. The experts would ask somebody who had an agenda in one regard or another. The rhetoric was slanted way to one side or the other. Either the subjects involved were all crazy, lying, or confused, or the authorities were dealing with real demons and the world was about to end. It was like that scene in The Night Stalker where Carl Kolchak is trying to convince the folks in charge that they needed to issue crucifixes, stakes, and hammers to all law enforcement people in order to kill the vampire. And there was very little middle ground. The few were saying, it does not matter what you believe, it's what they believe that makes them dangerous. They were saying either these people are all crazy or you're dealing with honest-to-God demons. No middle ground was being taken. We had supervisors that just laughed if you mentioned there was an old building that looked as if some satanic activity had been taking place. There was no way I was ever going to mention running into those folks on the river in the middle of the night. And then, 1992, the Justice Department came out saying that they had debunked the myth of satanic ritual of abuse. Though accusations and satanically motivated child abuse rituals had pretty much died out in the mid 90s, law enforcement continued to treat Satanism as a potential criminal indicator. If you had a pentagram, say, tattooed on your body, which I've seen, you are right away a suspect of having done something nasty, probably in the woodshed. Okay. It looks like I've pretty much turned the whole satanic panic into a nothing burger, right? And no need to worry, all is well. Not really. The problem with all the 1980s hype was a lot of it was being used to make other stories unbelievable. Some folks will go with the idea if those folks were wrong and lying, then they're probably all wrong or lying. Michael and Angelo Aquino was born October 16th, 1946. He was an American political science and Satanist. He was the founder and the high priest of the Temple of Set. Aquino was also a specialist in psychological warfare for the military intelligence, and he was an officer in the U.S. Army. Aquino had been an Eagle Scout. He graduated Santa Barbara High School in 1964 before enrolling in the nearby University of California in Santa Barbara, where he received a bachelor's degree in political science as an ROTC, United States Army Distinguished Military Graduate, 1968. 69, he joined the Church of Satan, led by Anton LaVey, and he quickly rose through the ranks. 1971, Aquino had become appointed Magister Caverns of the fourth degree. Caverns. Well, it's not cavern like cave, it's something else. Anyway, he had become high up in the church hierarchy, and he was the editor of the publication The Cloven Hoof. He sat on the governing council of 9. That's what it was called. Following his commission in the Army, Aquino served as a psychological warfare specialist, and he was deployed to Vietnam. He served with the Green Beret, and in the 70s and into the early 80s, he was part-time NATO liaison officer in several European countries. You know, those folks that keep fighting between the Ukraine and Russia, those guys. He was a member of all that. While off duty, one of his tours, he visited Wawelsburg Castle, which was used by SS leader Heinrich Himmler and the SS. He was said to have performed a satanic ritual while he was there. Conflicts arose over time between LaVey and Aquino regarding the direction of the group. LaVey was heading in the direction of atheism and materialism. If there was no God, there was no devil. Aquino was very much into believing the devil as well as God were both real, and he had chosen the left-hand path. When LaVey started selling positions in the Church of Satan for money, Aquino left the group. After he left the Church of Satan, he started a ritual in which he asked Satan, he asked Satan for advice on what he should do. Man. Satan appeared to Aquino in the summer of 1975 and revealed that he would like to be called Set. the name that his worshippers in ancient Egypt had used. Aquino produced a religious text, the Book of Coming Forth by Night, which he claims was revealed to him by Set in the process of automatic writing. The book proclaimed Aquino Magus of the new Aeon of Set, an heir to LaVey's infernal mandate. On this basis, he founded the Temple of Set, which is dedicated to worshiping Set. In contrast to LaVey's approach, this group was an occult and hermetic orientation. Aquino orientation was strongly influenced by the works of the British occultist Aleister Crowley. The group's aim was self-deification, which it pursued by performing rituals and practicing black magic, amongst other things. 1975, the Temple of Set was registered as a non-profit church in California, and it received state and federal recognition and tax exemption. Aquino remained the temple's high priest until 79, when he handed over the role to Ronald Keith Barrett, who, following disputes, also founded his own satanic sect, the Temple of Anubis, a few years later. In November 1986, the San Francisco police began investigating allegations of sexual abuse in connection with the Army's Child Development Center at the Presidio in San Francisco. A girl came forward August 18, 1987 and identified Aquino as the culprit. At least 58 of the 100 children who had attended daycare center showed physical and mental signs of abuse, leading to a lawsuit by the parents for $60 million in damages. An investigation against Aquino was launched, but it was closed after insufficient evidence was found. Now I have to ask, was there a lack of evidence, or did certain folks in positions of power intercede to make sure the whole thing went away? Think of it like this. There you are, some general, with all the luxuries money and status can buy, when one of your less noteworthy orders comes to light. One of your underlings, who you promoted, knowing he was a Satanist, is now being scrutinized by the police. You placed this occultist in a position where he could do nasty things to young kids, and now your retirement is looking shaky. Could this have been a cover-up? Probably. John DeCamp, a politician and former member of the Nebraska legislature, linked Aquino to the Franklin child prostitution ring, but no charges were ever filed, and a grand jury finally dismissed the entire case in 1990. It's amazing what you can do to evidence when you're in a position of power. The latest thing going is the adrenochrome story. Kids are abused and then they have their blood drained so that certain people can drink it in order to stay young. We hear about things like Pizzagate, only to be told there's nothing to see here. 320,000 children went missing thanks to the mismanagement by those people along our southern border. Anybody want to guess why they all vanished and who may have benefited? The funny thing about Alex Jones, whether you like him or not, he has a much better rate of being accurate than the lamestream media. I think he's batting something like 90% accurate in his wild stories. And yet, people look at Alex like, oh, that guy, he's some kind of a nut because he comes out and he talks about things that nobody wants to hear about for years, and then all of a sudden, that's all you hear about. Satanism is a very real thing. It's not what Hollywood tells us. Speaking of Satanism and Hollywood, did you watch the Grammys or do you have good taste? Evil sells. Halloween is more popular than Christmas. You should see my yard in October. There's a big difference between having fun with spooky things or bowing to the devil. It looks more and more every day like the folks in Hollywood are on their knees to the Dark One. Would you believe the after school Satan Club? I had to look it up. There is such a thing. The After School Satan Club does not believe in introducing religion into public schools and will only open a club if other religious groups are operating on the campus. ASSC exists to provide a safe and inclusive alternative to the religious clubs that use threats of eternal damnation to convert school children to their belief system. Unlike our counterparts who publicly measure their success in young children's professions of faith, the After School Satan Club program focuses on science, critical thinking, creative arts, good works for the community. While engaging in all of these activities, we want club goers to have a good time. The ASSC is located in Washington State, where they have so many good time riots, the Green River Killer and Ted Bundy. Having fun with Satan. Who in the heck comes up with this stuff? Yep, the After School Satan Club. A lot of actors are coming out telling about the weird things going on in Hollywood. Mel Gibson is probably the most vocal. I would go into what he said, but it would make the show about 2 hours long. Just know that he has said that Hollywood was filled with pedophiles who abuse kids and drink their blood. There were no fact checkers until the truth began to slip out. I had to dig through a lot of naysayers to find a lot of this information. I could be wrong, or there might be something rotten in our country. Just look around at some of the things coming out of Hollywood or Washington or some of the other places where those people gather and ask yourself, is there really a satanic panic still going on, or do we have something to worry about? Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. I hope Snowball playing with the microphone didn't get too much, and hopefully my voice didn't sound too bad there. It's one of those things. No, I did not go see the doctor. No, I did not take any medication stronger than aspirin and coffee. Coffee and aspirin should clear up just about anything. If you enjoyed the show, tell your neighbors, tell your friends, tell people you don't even like. They should be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Till next Saturday. And what
Are you coming to the tree where they've strung up a man who they say he murdered 3? Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.